The stars had never seemed so quiet. Admiral Keith Voran stood at the center of his command bridge, his forearms folded behind his back in the traditional pose of Valenthy authority. His compound eyes, each containing thousands of tiny lenses, scanned the massive display screen that showed the positions of his fleet. 200 warships moved through the darkness of space like a swarm of predators hunting for prey. The Volante were an ancient race. They had sailed between the stars when humans were still living in caves and hitting each other with rocks. They had conquered 17 star systems. They had crushed dozens of younger species. Beneath their feet, the galaxy knew their name and feared it, and now they were about to add another conquest to their long history. Admiral said his second in command, a younger named Thixral, we are approaching the boundary of human space. The Aaron corridor lies directly ahead. Kevrin clicked his mandibles together. It was a sound that meant satisfaction among his people. Excellent. Order the fleet to maintain formation. We will enter the corridor in standard assault pattern. The Aaron corridor was a stretch of space between two massive nebulae. It was one of the few ways to enter human territory from Volante space. According to every intelligence report the Dominion had gathered, it was poorly defended. A few old sensor stations, perhaps a patrol ship or two, nothing that could stop a fleet of this size. The humans had been careless. They had left a door open, and the Vanthi were about to walk right through it. The studied his console with a hint of concern on his face. Admiral, I must note that our intelligence on this region is not entirely current. Our last detailed scan was performed 6 hours ago. Kevon turned one of his eye clusters toward his subordinate. 6 hours, that is nothing. What could possibly change in 6 hours? I do not know, Admiral. I simply wish to note it for the record. The old Admiral made a dismissive gesture with one of his upper arms. You worry too much, Thex. The humans are a scattered, chaotic species. They fight among themselves as often as they fight others. Their governments rise and fall like waves on a beach. They have no unity, no patience, no discipline. He turned back to the main display. They are children playing at being a civilization. They have held these territories for barely 300 years. We have ruled our empire for 12,000. What could they possibly do to us in 6 hours? Theo lowered his head in acceptance. Of course, Admiral, forgive my excessive caution. The fleet moved forward. On the bridge of his flagship, the DVS subjugator, Cathon allowed himself to feel pride. This ship was the greatest warship the Valenth had ever built. It was 3 km long, armed with weapons that could crack planets, protected by shields that could withstand a small star-going supernova. It had taken 50 years to build and another 22 perfect around it. The rest of the fleet formed a protective shell. Heavy cruisers, assault carriers, destroyer escorts, supply ships loaded with ammunition and fuel, troop transports carrying a 100,000 Valenthi soldiers ready to occupy human worlds. This was not just a raid. This was the beginning of a conquest. The Valenthi High Command had studied humanity for decades. They had watched the humans expand across their little corner of the galaxy. They had observed their wars, their politics, their strange and confusing culture, and they had reached a conclusion. Humanity was sitting on resources that the Volante needed, rich planets, rare minerals, strategic positions, and humanity was too weak and too divided to hold on to them. The time had come to take what the Dominion deserved. The first ships crossed into human space. Kevorin waited for alarms, waited for weapons fire, waited for some kind of response. Nothing happened. The corridor was empty, just rocks and dust in the cold light of distant stars. Sensors report no contacts, the roll announced. No ships, no stations, no defensive platforms. The corridor appears to be completely undefended. A younger officer at the tactical station made an excited clicking sound. Admiral, we have done it. The humans have abandoned their border. We can strike directly at their inner worlds. Kevorin held up a hand for silence. He had not survived 400 years of military service by celebrating too early. Continue scanning. Search for any sign of human activity. The sensor officers worked their consoles. Minutes passed. The fleet continued deeper into human space. Nothing, Admiral. The chief sensor officer finally reported. I am detecting some old mining operations on a few asteroids. Automated, abandoned. No signs of recent human activity anywhere in the corridor. Keithorin allowed his mandibles to click again. Perhaps he had been right after all. Perhaps the humans really were as weak and foolish as everyone said. The humans probably never expected an attack through this route, he said to his bridge crew. They thought the nebulae would protect them. They thought no one would dare to navigate the Aran corridor with a full battle fleet. He spread his forearms wide. They underestimated the Valenthi, as everyone does. The crew responded with sounds of approval and agreement. Morale was high. Victory seemed certain. Far away in a different part of the galaxy, a human woman was smiling. Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka sat in her command center deep beneath the surface of Luna, Earth Moon. The room was cold and dark, lit only by the soft glow of holographic displays. Dozen officers worked quietly at their stations, monitoring data streams from across human space. Tanaka was 63 years old. She had served in the Terran Navy. For 40 of those years, she had fought in 3 wars, commanded 7 major operations, and buried more friends than she cared to count. Her hair was gray. Her face was lined, and her eyes held the calm patience of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything. On the main display in front of her, she watched 200 Volante warships move deeper into the Aran corridor. They took the bait, said Captain Marcus Webb, her chief of staff. He was a tall man with dark skin and a permanent expression of professional concern right down the corridor, just like our analysts predicted. Tanaka nodded slowly. The Valanthia are predictable. They've been waging war the same way for 10,000 years. They see an open door, they walk through it. They never stop to wonder why the door was left open in the first place. Should we begin Phase 1, Admiral? Not yet. Tanaka studied the display, watching the enemy fleet formation. Let them get deeper, let them feel safe, let them start thinking about all the glory they're going to win. Webb frowned slightly. With respect, Admiral, every hour we wait gives them more time to detect our positions. Tanaka turned to look at him. Her expression was calm, almost serene. Marcus clears throat. We've been preparing for this moment for 11 weeks. We've hidden ships inside asteroids. We've planted sensor ghosts throughout the corridor. We've positioned 3 separate strike groups At jump points they don't even know exist. She turned back to the display. The Volante can search for 100 hours, and they won't find anything we don't want them to find, and if they turn back they won't. The Volante don't retreat, it's against their nature. They'll keep pushing forward until they hit something. A small smile crossed her face, and then they'll hit something. In the Aran corridor, the Valency fleet continued its advance. 3 hours had passed since they crossed the border. 3 hours of empty space and silence. Admiral Keth Voron was beginning to feel uneasy. It was not fear. Did not feel fear the way other species did, but there was something wrong. Something his instincts were trying to tell him. The corridor was too empty, too quiet. It felt less like an undefended border and more like a trap waiting to be sprung. Thexel, he said quietly, order long-range sensors to maximum sensitivity. I want every piece of rock in this corridor scanned and analyzed. His second-in-command looked surprised. Admiral, do you suspect something? I suspect nothing, but I have not lived this long by ignoring my instincts. Scan everything. The order went out across the fleet. Sensor officers turned their equipment toward the surrounding space. They scanned asteroids. They scanned dust clouds. They scanned the distant walls of the nebulae that bordered the corridor. They found nothing. Admiral, the chief sensor officer reported, we have completed a full sweep of the immediate area. There are no ships, no stations, no weapons platforms, no mines. The only artificial structures are abandoned mining equipment and a few old human satellites, all of which appear to be non-functional. Keith clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. What about those thermal readings, the ones we detected earlier? Background radiation. Admiral, the nebulae generate significant electromagnetic interference. Our systems have filtered out numerous false positives. Ketone turned the words over in his mind. In his experience, there was no such thing as a false positive. There was only information you didn't understand yet. But the sensors showed nothing. His officers assured him there was nothing. What was he supposed to do? Turn back? Because of a feeling? No, the Volante did not turn back. The Volante advanced. Always continue on course, he ordered. Increase speed by 10%. I want to be through this corridor and into the human core systems within 12 hours. The fleet accelerated. 200 ships moving together like a single organism, hungry for conquest. None of them noticed the tiny sensor pods hidden among the asteroids. None of them detected the micro-transmissions being sent through secure quantum channels. None of them had any idea that their position, speed, and formation were being relayed in real time to an enemy they had not even seen. Yet human technology was not more advanced than Valency technology. In many ways, it was less sophisticated. The Volante had better shields, bigger weapons, faster engines. On paper, they should have won any direct confrontation, but humans had learned long ago that wars were not won on paper. Humans had spent their entire history fighting each other. They had developed the art of deception into a science. They had learned that the best victory was one your enemy never saw coming. They had built their entire military doctrine around a simple idea: never fight fair. They believed in honor. They believed in facing your enemy directly, matching strength against strength. They announced their attacks with formal declarations of war. They followed rules that had been established. Thousands of years ago, humans did not believe in any of that. On a small asteroid 3 light minutes ahead of the Valenthi fleet, a hatch opened. Silently, a sensor array extended into space, so small and so carefully designed that it was almost impossible to detect. Clear's throat, it swept the approaching ships with passive sensors, gathering data without emitting any signals that could be traced. Lieutenant Sarah Chin sat in a tiny observation post inside the asteroid, watching the data scroll across her screen. She had been here for 6 weeks, living in a space barely larger than a closet, eating recycled food and breathing recycled air. She had not spoken to another human being in all that time, except through encrypted text messages. But now, finally, the waiting was over. She typed a message and sent it through the quantum channel. Targets in range, count 200, formation holding steady, flagship identified, DVS subjugator, center of formation. A response came back almost instantly. Acknowledged, maintain observation. Phase 1 begins in 4 hours. Chen smiled in the darkness of her tiny post. 4 hours, after 6 weeks of waiting. 4 more hours was nothing. She settled back in her seat and continued watching the enemy fleet move toward its doom. Back on the subjugator, Admiral Keth Varen had retreated to his private quarters. The room was sparse by Valenthi standards, a resting platform, a small shrine to the ancestors, a window that showed the stars streaming past as the ship traveled through space. He stood at that window now, watching the darkness, thinking something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. The corridor was too easy. The humans had to know this route existed. They had to know it was vulnerable. So why hadn't they defended it? Were they really that careless, that arrogant, that stupid? Snorts, or was there something else going on, something he couldn't see? Kevbrand had fought many enemies in his long career. He had learned to respect strength and to exploit weakness. But he had also learned that the most dangerous enemy was not the one who stood in front of you. It was the one who was waiting where you didn't expect them. He turned away from the window and activated his personal communication device. Thexel, come to my quarters. We need to talk. A few minutes later, his second-in-command arrived. Thexel was young by Valenthi standards, only 150 years old, but he was intelligent and cautious, qualities that Keth valued. You wish to see me, Admiral? Keith Vorn gestured for him to sit. I want to discuss our situation honestly and without concern for protocol. That's hesitated. Speaking honestly to a superior was not something Valenth officers usually did, but after a moment he sat down across from the Admiral. What concerns you? Everything. Kevon leaned forward. This mission was too easy. The intelligence was too convenient. The corridor is too empty. I feel like we are walking into something. Thex, but I cannot see what considered this. The humans are not known for sophisticated military strategy. Admiral, their wars have always been chaotic, improvised, reactive. Perhaps they simply did not anticipate our attack, perhaps, but consider this. We have been planning this invasion for 2 years. We have gathered intelligence, built ships, trained soldiers, developed strategies. We have been very careful and very thorough. Keveran's compound eyes glittered in the dim light. What if the humans have been just as careful? What if they have been watching us the entire time? That would require intelligence capabilities far beyond what we believe they possess. And what do we actually know about their capabilities? We know what they have shown us. We know what our spies have reported, but humans are skilled at deception. What if everything we think we know is exactly what they wanted us to think? Thexra was silent for a long moment. If that is true, Admiral, then we may be in serious danger. Yes. Keithan rose from his seat and walked back to the window. But what can we do? Turn back? The High Command would never accept retreat based on nothing more than suspicion, and my instincts, while they have served me well, are not evidence. So we continue forward. We continue forward, but we do so with our eyes open. Double the sensor sweeps. Put the fleet on heightened alert. Prepare our defensive formations. He turned to face his subordinate. If this is a trap, Thexel, I want to be ready to fight our way out of it. Yes, Admiral, I will see to it immediately. Thexel left to carry out his orders. Kevorin remained at the window watching the stars. Somewhere out in that darkness, something was watching him back. He was certain of it. He just hoped he would see it before it struck. But hope, as he was about to learn, was not a strategy that worked very well against humanity. The Valency fleet continued deeper into human space. Each hour brought them closer to their target. Each hour brought them closer to the trap that had been prepared for them. And on Luna, Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka checked the time and nodded to herself. 3 hours to Phase 1. The clock was ticking and humanity was ready. The first scout ship vanished at exactly 3:47 hours fleet time. Lieutenant Commander Vexner was piloting the small reconnaissance vessel at the far edge of the formation. His job was simple: stay ahead of the main fleet, scan for threats, report anything unusual. It was boring work. He had been doing it for 3 hours and had found nothing but rocks and dust. He was thinking about his evening meal when his sensors flickered. Just for a moment, just a brief flash of something on his screen, then it was gone. Vexer leaned forward and checked his instruments. Everything looked normal. The readings were clean. Probably just interference from the nebula. This whole corridor was full of electromagnetic noise. He relaxed back into his seat. He never saw the small object that attached itself to the underside of his hull. He never heard the tiny cutting laser that began to slice through his engine compartment. Now he never had time to send a warning before his ship lost power, went dark, and drifted silently into the void. One moment the scout ship was a bright dot on the fleet's tactical display. The next moment it was gone. On the bridge of the subjugator, a sensor officer frowned at his screen. Admiral, we have lost contact with Scout 7. Kevon turned from the main display. Lost contact? What do you mean? The ship's transponder has stopped transmitting. All telemetry has ceased. It simply disappeared. Technical malfunction, possibly, Admiral, but the loss was very sudden. There was no warning, no distress signal, no indication of any problem. The officer's voice held a note of confusion. It was there and then it was not. The roll stepped closer to the sensor station. Can you scan the area where we lost the ship? I am doing so now. The officer worked his controls. I'm detecting debris, small fragments, consistent with a ship being destroyed. The bridge fell silent. Keith Vorin felt his mandibles tighten. Destroyed by what? Unknown, Admiral. There was no weapons fire that we Detected, no energy signatures, no missiles, nothing. Keith Vorn stared at the display for a long moment. One ship. It could have been an accident, a malfunction. Maybe the pilot made a mistake and flew into an asteroid. These things happen, but his instincts were screaming at him that this was not an accident. Order all scout ships to pull back to the main formation, he said, and increase sensor coverage on the surrounding space. I want to know what happened to that ship. The orders went out. The fleet continued forward, but now there was tension in the air. The easy confidence of a few hours ago was beginning to fade. 20 minutes later, another scout ship vanished, so then another, then two more at the same time. By the time an hour had passed, 17 ships were gone. 17 ships simply erased from existence without warning, without explanation, without any trace of whatever had destroyed them. Keith stood at the center of his bridge, his forearms rigid with tension. Around him, his officers worked frantically at their stations, searching for answers that refused to appear. Report, he demanded. What are we dealing with? The chief sensor officer looked up with obvious distress on his face. Admir, I do not know. Every ship that has been lost was at the edge of our formation. They were all alone, separated from other vessels. But we have detected no enemy ships, no weapons, no attackers of any kind. Ships do not simply vanish. I know, Admiral, but that is exactly what is happening. Thex approached with a data pad in his hands. Admiral, I have been reviewing the sensor logs from the moments before each ship disappeared. I found something. He handed the pad to Keth Vorn. The Admiral studied the data. It showed a series of sensor readings from the seconds before one of the scout ships was lost. There, they said, pointing to a small spike in the data. Do you see it? A brief thermal bloom lasting less than half a second. It appeared directly behind the scout ship just before we lost contact. What caused it? I do not know, but I found similar readings before every ship we lost. Something is out there, Admiral. Something small and fast and very, very good at hiding. Keith felt a cold sensation spreading through his body. It was not fear, it was something worse. It was the realization that he had been wrong. The corridor was not undefended. The humans had not been careless. They had been waiting. Sound battle alert, he ordered. All ships to defensive formation, weapons online, shields to maximum. Alarms began to wail. Throughout the fleet, 200 ships shifted their positions, tightening their formation, raising their defenses. Gun crews ran to their stations. Fighter pilots climbed into their cockpits. The mood changed from casual confidence to grim preparation, but still no enemy appeared. The minutes stretched on. Fleet moved forward in its defensive formation, weapons ready, sensors scanning. Every officer on every ship watched their screens, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. An hour passed, then two. The tension became almost unbearable. Officers snapped at each other. Crews grew exhausted from maintaining high alert. And still the corridor remained empty. Kieran began to wonder if he had overreacted. Perhaps the lost ships really had been accidents. Perhaps the thermal readings were just random noise. Perhaps there was nothing out there at all. Then the communications officer spoke up. Admiral, I'm receiving a transmission, unknown source. It appears to be directed at us. Everyone on the bridge turned to look at him. What kind of transmission? Audio only. Admiral Interan Standard, Keith. Voron's compound eyes narrowed. Play it. The officer pressed a button. A voice filled the bridge. It was a human voice. Calm and clear and somehow amused. You're already surrounded, that was all. 3 words, then silence. The bridge. Crew looked at each other with expressions of shock and confusion. Kethaveran felt his grip tighten on the railing in front of him. Trace that transmission, he ordered. Find out where it came from. I am trying, Admiral, but the signal was bounced through multiple points. It could have originated anywhere within 1,000 km, then scan that entire area. Find them. The sensors swept the surrounding space. They found nothing, just rocks and dust in the distant glow of the nebulae. No ships, no stations, no enemy forces of any kind. The human voice had spoken from empty space, and then it had vanished just like the scout ships. Thex moved closer to the Admiral and spoke quietly. Admiral, I believe we are being tested. The humans are watching us. They are studying how we react. To what end, I do not know, but whatever they are planning, they are not ready to reveal themselves yet. They want us confused, frightened, off balance. Keith forced himself to take a deep breath. His second in command was right. This was psychological warfare. The humans were trying to shake his confidence, to make him doubt himself, to make him make mistakes. He would not give them that satisfaction. Order the fleet to resume course, he said, his voice steady. Maintain defensive formation, but continue forward. We will not be intimidated by ghost voices and sensor shadows. But Admiral, the lost ships were unfortunate losses, but we cannot turn back because of a few destroyed scouts. We are the Volant Dominion. We do not retreat from enemies we cannot even see. The orders went out. The fleet began to move again, but now every officer on every ship was watching their screens with new intensity. They knew something was out there. They just could not find it. Far away from the main fleet, hidden inside a hollow asteroid that looked completely natural. Lieutenant Sarah Chen watched the enemy formation with professional interest. They're getting nervous, Mashi muttered to herself, typing notes into her terminal, but they're still moving forward. Stubborn bugs. Her orders were clear. Observe and report. Do not engage. Do not reveal her position. Let the stealth teams do their work. The stealth teams were the best humanity had to offer. Small groups of 2 or 3 operators equipped with technology that made them almost invisible. They move through space in tiny craft no bigger than escape pods, using passive sensors and careful positioning to avoid detection. Their job tonight was simple: make the afraid. Every lost scout ship had been taken out by a stealth team. They would approach from blind spots in the enemy sensor coverage, attach cutting charges to critical systems, and disappear before anyone knew they were there. Quick, clean, silent. It was not a military tactic. They understood. In their wars, you confronted your enemy directly. You announced yourself. You fought with honor. Humans had a different philosophy. You didn't announce yourself. You didn't fight with honor. You hit your enemy in the dark from behind without warning, and then you disappeared before they could hit back. It was not honorable. It was effective. Chen received a message from Fleet Command. Phase 1 complete. Proceed to Phase 2 positioning. She smiled and began powering up her microship. It was time to move to a new observation point. Things were about to get much more Interesting, on the bridge of the subjugator, Keth Varon was reviewing the fleet status when his tactical officer suddenly sat up straight. Admiral contacts, everyone turned to look at the main display. For a moment, there was nothing. Then at the very edge of sensor range, a cluster of small dots appeared. What is it? Kevoran demanded. Ships, Admiral, small ships. They just appeared. I do not know where they came from. How many? The tactical officer worked his controls, his movements becoming more frantic. 12, no. 20, no. He looked up with something like shock on his face. Admiral, they keep appearing. I am now detecting over 50 contacts. Keeburn moved to the tactical station and looked at the display. Himself, the dots were appearing all around the fleet, not attacking, just appearing, popping into existence from behind asteroids, from inside dust clouds, from locations where the sensors had shown nothing just moments ago. That's impossible, he breathed. We scanned those areas. There was nothing there. They were hiding. Admiral Thex's voice was grim. They have been there all along, watching us, waiting for the right moment. The count on the display continued to rise. 60 contacts, 80, 100. They are surrounding us, the tactical officer reported, his voice shaking slightly. They have ships on all sides. Above us, below us, in front and behind. Weapons range, they are staying just beyond optimal targeting distance. Admiral, they are not attacking, they are just there. Keith Vorn stared at the display, watching the human ships multiply around his fleet like stars. Appearing at nightfall, he had been a soldier for 400 years. He had fought in dozens of battles, but he had never seen anything like this. The humans had been invisible, completely invisible. His fleet had sailed right through them without detecting a single ship, and now they were everywhere. How? He asked, not really expecting an answer. How did they hide so many ships from us? Our sensors are not designed to detect vessels this small, the sensor officer replied. These ships are barely larger than shuttles, and they appear to have some kind of coating that absorbs our scanning beams. We only see them when they allow us to see them. When they allow us to see them, Kevoran repeated. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. New voice came over the communications channel, another human voice, different from the first. This one was female, older, with a tone of absolute calm that somehow made it more threatening than any battle cry. Admiral Keth Voron, this clears throat, is Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka of the Terran Confederacy. I suggest you order your fleet to stop. Keith Voron straightened his posture and responded in his best Terran standard. I am Admiral Keth Voron of the Valency Dominion. You are interfering with a lawful military operation. Stand aside or face the consequences. A pause, then Tanaka's voice returned, and Keth Voron could have sworn he heard a hint of amusement in it. Admiral, with respect, you are in no position to threaten anyone. Your fleet is currently surrounded by 140 human warships. We have been tracking your movements for 3 hours. We know your formation, your shield frequencies, and in the maintenance schedules of every ship in your fleet. Another pause. You walked into our space. You are now in our trap. I recommend you consider your next actions very carefully. The bridge was silent. Every Volante officer stared at their admiral, waiting for his response. Kevoran's mind was racing. 140 ships. His fleet outnumbered them significantly, and Valenthy's ships were larger, more powerful, better armed. On paper, he should still have the advantage, but these humans had spent hours watching him without being detected. They had picked off his scouts. Without revealing themselves, they had positioned themselves perfectly around his fleet while his sensors showed nothing but empty space. What else were they capable of? Admiral Tanaka, he said slowly, the Valenthy Dominion does not respond to threats. If you wish to negotiate, we can discuss terms, but we will not be intimidated into retreat. I'm not asking you to retreat, Admiral. I'm asking you to stop so we can have a conversation. Right now you're flying deeper into a prepared defensive zone. Every hour you advance, you reduce your options. Her voice hardened slightly. I'm offering you a chance to talk. I suggest you take it. Fexral touched Keth Varen's arm and spoke quietly. Admiral, perhaps we should listen. The humans clearly have capabilities we did not anticipate. We need time to assess the situation. Kevoran hesitated. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to attack, to show these humans that the Volante were not afraid, to punish them for their arrogance, but he had not survived 400 years by being stupid. The humans had surprised him. They had outmaneuvered him. They clearly knew something he did not. All ships halt, he ordered. Maintain defensive positions, but hold fire. The fleet slowed to a stop. 200 Valthy warships hung in space, surrounded by smaller human vessels that watched them like wolves watching trapped prey. Admiral Tanaka Kabaran said, I am listening. Good, here's what's going to happen, Admiral. We're going to have a discussion about the future of the human relations. We're going to talk about borders and treaties, and what happens when one species decides to invade another species territory without provocation. We had provocation. Your people have been. Admiral Tanaka's voice cut through his protest like a blade. I wasn't finished. You invaded our space. You brought 200 warships into our territory. By any standard of interstellar law, that is an act of war. Another pause. But we are willing to be reasonable. We are willing to let you leave. All you have to do is turn your fleet around, go back to Volanth, and never come back. Kevoran felt his anger rising. You expect us to simply retreat, to run away like frightened prey? The Volanth do not. Admiral, I'm going to stop you right there. Tanaka's voice remained calm, almost friendly. I know that Valenthy don't retreat. I know you've been telling yourself that for the last few hours, but I want you to think very carefully about your situation. My situation is that I command a fleet of 200 ships, each larger and more powerful than anything you have. Yes. And my situation is that I've spent 11 weeks preparing for your arrival. I know exactly where your ships are. I know their strengths and weaknesses. I have weapons pointed at your fuel ships, your ammunition transports, your command vessels. Right now my crews are waiting for my order to fire. She let that sink in. You have bigger ships, Admiral, but I have position, I have surprise, and I have a plan. The silence stretched on. Kevan looked at his tactical display, at the human ships surrounding his fleet, and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Uncertainty. What do you want, Admiral Tanaka? I already told you. I want you to leave, but I know you're not going to do that because they Valenthy don't retreat. So here's what I'll offer instead. Stay where you are for now. Don't advance any further. Let's talk, maybe we can find a solution. That doesn't involve both of us losing a lot of ships and a lot of lives. Kebrin considered the offer. It was reasonable. Too reasonable. What was she planning? And if I refuse? Another pause. When Tanaka spoke again, her voice had lost all trace of friendliness. Then by the time you realize what's happening, we'll have already struck again and again and again, until there's nothing left of your fleet but debris and regret. The transmission ended. Keen stood on his bridge, surrounded by his officers, staring at a display filled with enemy contacts. For the first time in 400 years, he did not know what to do next. The humans had been right about one thing: they were already everywhere. And he had a terrible feeling that they were just getting started. 11 weeks earlier, Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka had received a report that would change the course of human history. She had been sitting in her office on Luna, reviewing the usual morning briefings when her intelligence chief burst through the door without knocking. Commander James Okonkwo was a tall man from Nigeria, brilliant and unflappable. In 12 years of working together, Tanaka had never seen him look afraid. He looked afraid now. Admiral, we have problem. Tanaka sat down her coffee cup. What kind of problem? Okonkwo placed a data pad on her desk. Operation Harvest. The Valanthia are moving. Tanaka picked up the pad and began reading. As she did, her face grew increasingly serious. The report came from deep cover agents embedded in Valent space, people who had spent years working their way into positions where they could observe enemy military movements. What they had observed was terrifying. The Valanthi High Command was assembling a battle fleet, 200 warships, troop transports, supply vessels, enough firepower to destroy a dozen worlds, and according to communications intercepts, they had a target in mind: the Aaron corridor. They're coming through the back door. Tanaka murmured, yes, Admiral, our analysts estimate they will be ready to move in approximately 3 months. 3 months? It was not a lot of time to prepare a defense against the largest fleet ever assembled. The Terran Confederacy had good ships and good soldiers, but they were spread thin across human space. Concentrating enough force to stop this invasion would leave other areas vulnerable unless they did something different. Tanaka looked up at Okonkwo. Does High Command know about this? I came to you first, Admiral. I thought you might have ideas. He was right. Tanaka always had ideas. That was why she had risen to her current position. She was not just a commander who followed orders. She was a strategist who created options where none seemed to exist. She stood up and walked to the window of her office. Outside, she could see the gray surface of Luna stretching toward the horizon, and beyond it, the blue-green curve of Earth. Billions of people live down there, billions of lives that depended on the military making the right decisions. The Valanthi think we're weak, she said slowly. They think we're divided. They think if they hit us hard enough, we'll fall apart. They may be right, Admiral. Our political situation is complicated. It always is. Tanaka turned back to face him. But that's not what concerns me. What concerns me is that the Volante have no idea what they're walking into. Okonkwo raised an eyebrow. Admiral, think about it. James, the Volante have been fighting the same way for 10,000 years. They build big fleets. They sail them to their target. They crush whatever's in Front of them, it's worked for them. Against every species they've ever faced. A small smile crossed her face. But they've never faced us. With respect, Admiral, humans have not had much success against the Volante in the past. The Proxima incident was a disaster. I know, I was there. Tanaka's voice hardened at the memory, but that was 20 years ago. We've learned since then. We've adapted. We've developed new technologies, new tactics, new ways of thinking about war. She walked back to her desk and sat down, clear's throat, her mind already working through possibilities. The Valanthi think war is a contest of strength. They line up their forces, we line up our forces, and whoever has more firepower wins. That's how they've always done it. And how do we do it differently? Tanaka looked at the intelligence report, at the details of enemy fleet movements and timmets. We don't wait for them to hit us. We hit them first before they even know we're there. Over the next 11 weeks, Tanaka had put her plan into action. It was the most complex military operation in human history, and it had to be done in absolute secrecy. The Volante had spies everywhere. If they got even a hint of what was coming, everything would be ruined. The first step was positioning. Tanaka identified every possible route the Valanthi fleet might take into human space. The Aran corridor was the most likely target, so that's where she concentrated her forces. But she didn't put her ships where the enemy could see them. Instead, she hid them. The stealth program had been under development for years. Small ships with special hull coatings that absorb sensor beams, engines designed to run cold, producing almost no heat signature, electronic systems that could go into a low power mode, making them nearly invisible to anything but visual observation. Tanaka had 140 of these stealth frig. She scattered them throughout the Aran corridor like seeds planted in a field. Some were hidden inside hollowed out asteroids, others drifted among the debris fields, their power plants running at minimum levels. A few were positioned in the shadow zones of the nebulae where sensor coverage was naturally poor, and then they waited. It was the hardest part of the operation. Weeks of silence, weeks of living in cramped spaces, eating recycled food, knowing that detection meant death. The crews were all volunteers. They knew what they were signing up for, but that didn't make it easy. Meanwhile, Tanaka prepared the second part of her plan. The Valanthi expected to fight human ships. They had studied human tactics, analyzed human weapons, developed counters to everything they thought humans could do. But Tanaka wasn't planning to give them a conventional battle. She was planning to give them a nightmare. The stealth teams were the elite of the elite, small units trained in unconventional warfare. Their job was not to fight the enemy head-on. Their job was to cause chaos, destroy supply lines, disable critical systems, kill enemy soldiers in their sleep, make the enemy paranoid, afraid, unable to trust anything they saw or heard. These teams were deployed throughout the corridor weeks before the Valanth arrived. They set up observation posts on asteroids. They planted sensor arrays and debris fields. They prepared ambush points and escape routes. When the enemy fleet finally arrived, they were already there watching. The Valanthi had no idea. On Luna, Tanaka monitored the operation from her command center. Every piece of data from the corridor flowed through this room. She knew where every enemy ship was. She knew their Formation, their speed, their course. She knew more about the Valenthi fleet than the Valenthi admirals knew themselves, and now finally it was time to act. She stood at the center of the command room, surrounded by her staff. Holographic displays showed the tactical situation in real time. The Valenthi fleet had stopped, responding to her message. 200 ships hanging in space, surrounded by human vessels they hadn't known existed until an hour ago. Admiral Kethen is smart, she said to Captain Webb, smarter than I expected. He didn't attack when we revealed ourselves. He's waiting to see what we do next. Yes, he's gathering information, trying to understand the situation before he commits. Tanaka nodded approvingly. I respect that. Most Valenthi commanders would have charged in already. Does that change our plan? No, but it means we need to be careful. Kev Veron won't be goaded into a mistake. We'll have to push him. She turned to one of her officers. Lieutenant, what's the status of our secondary force? The lieutenant checked his console. Carrier Group 7 is in position, Admiral. 3 carriers, 15 destroyers, 40 fighter squadrons. They're waiting at the exit point of the corridor. Good. Tell them to stay hidden. For now, they're our insurance policy. Tanaka looked back at the main display. The Valenthi fleet was still sitting where it had stopped, shields up, weapons ready. They knew they were in danger, but they didn't know how much danger. They didn't know about the carrier group behind them cutting off their retreat. They didn't know about the stealth team's position throughout their formation, ready to strike at specific targets on command. They thought this was a standoff. They had no idea it was an execution waiting to happen. Captain Webb moved closer to the Admiral. Ma'am, I have to ask, are we really going to give them a chance to retreat after they invaded our space? Tanaka was silent for a moment. It was a fair question. The Valenthi had committed an act of war. By rights, she could destroy their fleet right now, and no one would fault her for it. It would be a decisive victory, a message to the galaxy that humanity was not to be trifled with. But that was not what she wanted. Yes, Marcus, we're going to give them a chance, not because they deserve it, but because we need them to survive. Admiral, think about it. If we destroy this fleet completely, we become a threat. Every other species in the galaxy looks at us and thinks the humans are dangerous. We need to unite against them before they come for us. Tanaka shook her head. That's not what we want. We want the galaxy to know that humanity is not to be attacked, but we also want them to know that we're not conquerors. So we let them go. We let some of them go, enough to carry the message back to their high command, enough to make sure everyone knows what happened here. A cold smile crossed her face. And we make sure they understand that this was us being merciful, that we could have done much, much worse. Webb nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. We win the battle and the message. Exactly. The Valenthi retreat. Humiliated but alive, they tell everyone what happened, and suddenly every species that was thinking about invading human space starts having second thoughts. Tanaka looked at the display again. We don't want to conquer the galaxy, Marcus. We just want to be left alone, and the best way to ensure that is to make everyone afraid of what happens when they don't leave us alone. She turned to face her staff. All right, people, phase 2 is about to begin. Let's show our guests what humanity is capable Back in the Aran corridor, Admiral Kethvon was having a heated debate with his senior officers. "We should attack immediately," insisted Captain Thinks, commander of the assault carrier Devastator. "We outnumber them. Our ships are stronger. We can break through their encirclement and destroy them and lose how many ships in the process." The role countered, "We know nothing about their capabilities. They hid an entire fleet from our sensors for hours. What else can they do that we don't know about? They are small ships. Light weapons, no match for Valent firepower. They destroyed 17 of our scouts without us even detecting them. Does that suggest weakness to you?" The argument continued around the conference table. Keithorin listened but did not participate. He was thinking about Admiral Tanaka's words. "By the time you realize what's happening, we'll have already struck again." It was a threat, but it was also, he suspected, the truth. Humans were not like other species. They did not fight in predictable ways. They did not follow the rules of warfare that had governed galactic conflicts for millennia. They fought dirty. They fought smart. They fought to win, no matter what it took. And right now they held every advantage except raw numbers. Admiral Thiel said, turning to him, "What are your orders?" Kevorin rose from his seat. The other officers fell silent, waiting for his decision. "We wait," he said. "We do not attack until we understand what we are facing. The humans have shown us they can hide their ships from our sensors. They have shown us they can strike without warning. Before we commit to battle, I want to know what other surprises they have prepared." "But, Admiral, that is my decision." His voice was firm, brooking no argument. "Order all ships to maintain defensive positions. No one fires unless I give the command. We will wait and we will watch and we will learn." The officers exchanged glances but did not protest. Further, they left to carry out their orders. Alone in the conference room, Kethabin walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, hidden in the darkness, the humans were watching him, planning their next move, waiting for him to make a mistake. He would not give them that satisfaction. But even as he made that resolution, he knew in his heart that he was no longer in control of this situation. The humans had taken the initiative from him the moment his fleet entered the quarter. Everything that happened from now on would be on their terms. The question was not whether he could win this battle. The question was whether he could survive it. And for the first time in 400 years, Admiral Kethvoron was not sure of the answer. On Luna Fleet, Admiral Tanaka watched the Valency fleet hold its position. "Good." Keith Voron was being cautious. That meant he was smart enough to be dangerous, but it also meant he was afraid, and fear was a weapon just like any other. "Begin phase 2, she ordered. "Let's see how the Admiral responds to pressure." Across the corridor, stealth teams received their commands. They had been patient long enough. Now it was time to hunt. Supply ship Burden of Plenty exploded without warning at exactly your 912 hours. One moment it was hanging safely at the center of the Valenth formation, surrounded by warships and protected by overlapping defensive screens. The next moment it was an expanding ball of fire and debris scattering wreckage across 1,000 km of space. Admiral Keth Varon was on the bridge of the subjugator when it happened. He watched the explosion on his tactical display with cold disbelief. That ship had been carrying fuel for the entire fleet. Enough antimatter to power 200 warships. For months, now it was gone. How he demanded. That ship was in the middle of our formation. Nothing should have been able to reach it. His sensor officers scrambled to find answers. The tactical display showed chaos. Warning lights flashed across the fleet as other ships reported contacts, weapons fire, explosions, debris. Admiral, we're detecting multiple attacks throughout the formation. The humans are hitting our supply ships and support vessels. Where are they coming from? Everywhere. Sir, they're inside our formation. It was impossible. It should have been impossible. The Valenthy fleet had maintained a tight defensive formation specifically to prevent enemy ships from getting close. Their sensors were constantly scanning for threats. Their weapons were ready to fire at anything that approached, but the humans had not approached. They had already been there. The stealth frigates had spent hours drifting among the Valenth ships. Cold and silent, they had positioned themselves at key points throughout the enemy formation, behind supply ships, below ammunition transports, near critical command vessels, waiting for the order to strike. When that order came, they all fired at once. An anti-air torpedo streaked toward their targets from point blank range. There was no time to react, no time to raise shields or fire counter missiles. The weapons simply appeared from empty space and slammed into vulnerable hull sections before anyone knew they were coming. In the first 30 seconds of Phase 2, the lost 6 supply ships, 2 ammunition transports, and a medical cruiser. The explosions were visible across the entire fleet, bright flowers of fire blooming in the darkness, and then the human ships vanished again. They jumped to FTL before the Valenthy gunners could turn their weapons toward them. One moment they were there firing and killing, the next moment they were gone, leaving nothing but debris and confusion behind. Keverin gripped the railing in front of him, fighting to keep his composure. All ships spread formation, create distance between vessels. We need to eliminate their hiding spots. The order went out, but the fleet was slow to respond. Panic was spreading through the Valenthy crews. They had trained for conventional battles, for exchanges of fire between opposing fleets. They had not trained for this kind of warfare, where the enemy was invisible and everywhere and could strike without warning. Before the ships could even begin to separate, the humans struck again. This time they targeted the escort destroyers on the outer edge of the formation. Small stealth frigates appeared from behind asteroids and opened fire, unleashing salvos of missiles and energy weapons. The destroyers returned fire, but their targeting systems struggled to lock onto the tiny, fast-moving human ships. Within minutes, 12 destroyers were crippled or destroyed. And again the human ships vanished. They jumped away before the heavier Valenthy cruisers could bring their weapons to bear, hit and run, strike and disappear, kill without being killed in return. On the bridge of the subjugator, Thex approached the Admiral with a data pad. His hands were shaking slightly. Admiral, casualty reports, we have lost 19 ships. In the last 15 minutes, another 37 are reporting damage. Our ammunition reserves have been reduced by 40%. Keith Voren stared at the numbers. 9 ships in 15 minutes without the enemy losing a single vessel. This is not warfare, he said quietly. This is murder. Amal, we need to do something. Our crews are losing their nerve. If this continues, I know, Catherine forced himself to think clearly. The humans were using their mobility advantage to strike without consequence. They hit. They ran. They came back to hit again. The Valenthi fleet could not catch them. Could not pin them down, could Clear's throat not fight back effectively unless they changed the rules. Order all ships to form a defensive sphere, he commanded. Tightest possible formation, all weapons pointing outward. When the humans attack, we fire everything we have in their direction. But Admiral, that will reduce our maneuverability. We have no maneuverability. They are faster than us. They can jump in and out before we can react. Our only chance is to make attacking us so costly that they back off. The fleet reformed into a massive defensive ball, 200 ships packed together with overlapping fields of fire. It was not a good formation for offense, but it was strong for defense. Any ship attacking the sphere would face fire from dozens of vessels simultaneously. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The human ships held their distance, watching, waiting. Then Admiral Tanaka's voice came over the communications channel. Admiral Cathoran, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Keithan activated his transmitter. I am defending my fleet. That is my duty. Your duty is about to get a lot harder. Look behind you. Tactical display updated. Cathan felt his heart stop behind the fleet, blocking the exit from the corridor. New force had appeared. 3 massive carriers, each larger than anything the humans had shown before. 15 destroyers. Swarms of fightercraft pouring from launch bays like insects from a hive. The exit was sealed. The trap was complete. You didn't think we'd let you run, did you? Tanaka's voice was calm, almost conversational. You walked into our space, Admiral. You don't get to walk out unless we let you. Kevon stared at the display, watching the human forces position themselves around his fleet. He had thought the stealth frigates were bad, but those were small ships with light weapons designed for ambush and harassment. These new vessels were something else entirely. The carriers were launching hundreds of fighters, small nimble craft armed with missiles and energy weapons. They formed up in attack wings and began circling the formation like predators waiting to strike. You have 2 choices, Admiral. Tanaka continued. You can surrender your fleet and accept our terms, or you can fight and we will destroy you. Kevoran's mandibles clicked with anger. The Valenthi do not surrender. I was hoping you'd say that. The humans attacked. It was not like any battle Kevoran had ever experienced. The Valenthi way of war was orderly. Fleets lined up, exchanged fire, maneuvered for advantage. There was a rhythm to it, a logic that any trained officer could follow. The humans had no rhythm, no logic. They attacked from every direction at once with every type of weapon they had. The stealth frigates appeared inside the formation, again launching torpedoes at close range before jumping away. The fighters swarmed around the sphere, striking at weak points in the defensive coverage, dying by the dozens, but taking Valenth ships with them. The carriers launched wave after wave of fresh fighters, replacing their losses faster than the Valenth could kill them. And the human destroyers, were something special. They didn't try to match the Valanthi ship to ship. Instead, they used their superior speed to stay just out of effective weapons range, circling the formation and firing Long-range missiles, the missiles were not powerful enough to penetrate Volynth. Shields with a single hit, but they kept coming wave after wave, forcing the Volante ships to keep their shields up and their weapons focused outward, while the destroyers held the fleet attention. The stealth frigates continued their deadly work. They targeted specific ships with surgical precision, command vessels, sensor platforms, communications relays. One by one, the eyes and ears of the Vinthi fleet went dark. Kevin watched his tactical display, becoming more confused by the minute. Ships reported contacts that vanished before they could be confirmed. Communications broke down as relay stations were destroyed. Commanders who lost contact with their admirals began making their own decisions, sometimes conflicting with fleet orders. The Vinthi formation started to break apart. It happened slowly at first, a ship here, a ship there, moving out of position to chase an enemy contact or to help a damaged ally. But each ship that left the formation became vulnerable. The human stealth frigates were waiting. They picked off stragglers like wolves, hunting sheep that wandered from the flock. Hold formation, Ketharin shouted into his communicator. All ships maintain the defensive sphere. But his orders were not reaching everyone. The communications network was in chaos. Some ships responded, others didn't. The formation that had been so tight just minutes ago was now full of gaps and holes. The humans poured through those gaps like water through broken dam. What followed was 47 minutes of brutal, chaotic combat. The Volante fought back with everything they had. Their heavy weapons carved through human fighters, their shields held against missile salvos. When they managed to catch a stealth frig before it could jump away, their superior firepower reduced it to debris in seconds. But for every human ship they destroyed, they lost 3 of their own. The humans were everywhere, striking from angles the Volante had never trained to defend against. They came from above and below, from the front and behind, from inside the formation itself. They hit targets that should have been protected and escaped before retaliation could arrive. The Volante had never fought an enemy like this. Their entire military tradition was based on strength and order and direct confrontation. The humans offered them none of that. They offered only chaos, confusion, and death. From the shadows, on the bridge of the subjugator, Kethorin watched his fleet dying. The tactical display showed the truth in cold, hard numbers. 63 ships destroyed, another 47 damaged badly, enough to be out of the fight. His supply lines were gone. His ammunition was running low. His crews were exhausted, demoralized, afraid, and the humans just kept coming. Every time he thought he had found a pattern to their attacks, they changed tactics. Every time he adapted to one threat, another appeared. They fought like they had no rules, no limits, no concept of how war was supposed to be conducted. Because they didn't. Humans had been fighting each other since before they discovered fire. They had invented 1,000 ways to kill, and they had no shame about using all of them. War to humans was not a game with rules. It was a problem to be solved by any means necessary. Thex appeared at Kethar. Inside, the younger officer was wounded, his uniform stained with blue blood from a cut on his head. Admiral, we cannot sustain this. Our losses are catastrophic. If we continue fighting, we will be annihilated. What do you Suggest, retreat while we still have. Ships that can move, retreat to where? The corridor is blocked, the humans have positioned a carrier group behind us. Then we fight through them, better to face one force than three, Keithorin considered this, the carrier group. Blocking the exit was strong, but it was nothing compared to the combined forces. Attacking his fleet, if he concentrated all his remaining firepower on that single point, he might be able to break through. Some ships would escape, not many but some. It was not a glorious option. It was not even a good option. But it was the only option he had left. All ships, he ordered, prepare for immediate withdrawal. We will punch through the carrier group and retreat to Valenthy space. Set course for the exit point. All weapons focus on clearing a path. The order went out. The surviving Valenthy ships began to move, turning away from the stealth frigates and fighters, pointing their bows toward the distant carriers. It was a desperate maneuver. It meant exposing their rear to enemy attack. It meant leaving damaged ships behind. It meant admitting defeat, but Keithorin had no choice. His fleet was being torn apart. In another hour there would be nothing left. He had to save what he could. Van's ships accelerated toward the exit, firing as they went. Their heavy weapons reached out toward the human carriers, seeking to clear a path. The carriers responded with their own weapons, launching missiles and fighters to block the retreat. For a few minutes, it looked like the Valenthy might make it. Their concentrated firepower was overwhelming the carrier group's defenses. One destroyer was destroyed. Then another, a carrier, took a direct hit to its hull and began listing fires visible through breaches in its armor. But then the stealth frigates returned. They had been waiting for this, hiding in the debris, watching the turn to run. And now they struck at the rear of the retreating fleet, targeting engines and weapon systems. Ships that could have escaped were suddenly crippled, unable to maintain speed. The orderly retreat became a chaotic rout with faster ships pulling ahead and slower ships falling behind. The human fighters descended on the stragglers like vultures, finishing off damaged vessels one by one. Keithorin watched it all happen on his display. There was nothing he could do. The battle was no longer a battle. It was a disaster. Admiral Thexel said quietly, "We need to consider the possibility that we will not survive this." Keithorin turned to look at his second in command, the younger Valenthy's compound eyes were dim with exhaustion and pain, but his voice was steady. He had accepted what was coming. "I know," Keithorin said. "Order all ships that can still fight to cover the retreat of those that cannot. The subjugator will be the last ship to leave, Admiral." "That is an order, Thexel. If some of us must die so that others can survive, then that is what we will do. That is what it means to be Valenth." Thiel hesitated, then nodded. He turned to carry out the orders. Outside, the battle continued. The human forces pressed their advantage, destroying more ships with each passing minute, but they did not pursue the retreating vessels as aggressively as they could have. They let some escape. They did not try to achieve total annihilation. It was not mercy. Keithorin understood that now. It was strategy. The humans wanted survivors. They wanted witnesses who would return to Valenthy space and tell everyone what had happened here. They wanted the galaxy to know what humans were capable of. As the subjugator finally crossed out of the corridor and into neutral space, Kethorn looked back. At the destruction he was leaving. Behind, the wreckage of 166 Valanthi. Warships drifted among the asteroids. Thousands of his people were dead. The greatest fleet in Valanthi history had been shattered in less than 2 hours by an enemy they had dismissed as weak and primitive. The humans had taught him a lesson today, a lesson in humility, lesson in the price of arrogance, and he knew with absolute certainty that this lesson would change everything. The Vanthi had learned to fear, and they would never forget. The battle had ended 12 hours ago. Admiral Catherine stood at the viewport of his shattered bridge, staring out at what remained of his fleet, 34 ships. That was all that had survived. 34 ships. Out of 200, most of those were damaged. Some were barely able to move. All of them were low on ammunition, low on fuel, low on hope. Behind him the bridge was a ruin. Consoles had been destroyed by electrical fires. The ceiling was blackened with soot. Several stations were unmanned because the officers who had served at them were dead. The mighty Clear's throat, subjugator, pride of the Valthi Navy, was a wounded beast limping through the stars. Thiel approached him slowly. The young officer's injuries had been treated, but he still moved with pain. Admiral, we are receiving a transmission from the human flagship. Kevin did not turn around, put it on the main screen. The damaged display flickered to life. The snort's face of Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka appeared. She looked exactly as she had sounded during the battle, calm, professional, completely in control. There was no gloating in her expression, no triumph, no satisfaction. She looked like a surgeon who had completed a difficult operation and was now ready to discuss the recovery. Admiral Kethovoran, she said, I'm glad to see you survived. Many of my people did not know they didn't. Tanaka's expression remained neutral. War has costs, Admiral. Your high command knew that when they sent you into our space, they were willing to pay those costs with your lives. The question now is whether you're willing to let more of your people die. Keith Voran finally turned to face the screen. His compound eyes were dull with exhaustion, but his posture was still that of a warrior. What do you want? The same thing I wanted 12 hours ago. I want you to leave, go back to space, tell your high command what happened here, and make sure they understand that this was us being generous. Generous, the word came out with a bitter click. You call this generous? You destroyed my fleet. You killed thousands of my soldiers. You invaded our territory, Admiral. You brought 200 warships into our space with the intention of conquering our worlds. By any standard of interstellar law, we had the right to destroy every single one of your ships. Tanaka leaned forward slightly. We didn't. We let you run. We let survivors escape. We're letting you leave right now when we could just as easily finish what we started. Why? Because I want your high command to receive a message, not a recording. Not a report, a living witness who can tell them exactly what happened, who can describe in detail how their grand invasion was stopped by a force half their size, who can explain that humanity did not just defend itself but chose to show mercy when it would have been easier to show none. Karen was silent for a long moment. He understood what she was doing. The humans did not want to destroy the Valanth. They wanted to intimidate them. They wanted the entire Dominion to know what happened when you attacked human space. They were using him and the survivors of his fleet as messengers. It was brilliant, it was humiliating, and there was nothing he could do about it. What guarantee do I have that you will let us leave in peace? You have my word as an officer of the Terran Confederacy. You will not be attacked as long as you proceed directly to Valenthi space without stopping or deviating from your course. Tanaka paused. We will be watching, of course. We'll have ships shadowing you the entire way, but as long as you don't do anything stupid, you'll get home safely. And if we refuse, if we choose to fight, a hint of something cold entered Tanaka's eyes, then you'll die, all of you. We have more than enough firepower to finish what we started. Your ships are damaged, your ammunition is depleted, and your crews are exhausted. You wouldn't last an hour. She let that sink in. But I don't think you want to die, Admiral. I think you want to go home. I think you want to see your family again and sleep in your own bed and eat food that doesn't come out of an emergency ration pack. I think you're tired and hurt and angry, and you want this to be over. Catherine's mandibles clicked softly. She was right about all of it. I will convey your message to the High Command, he said finally. I will tell them exactly what happened here. Good, and while you're at it, tell them one more thing. Tanaka's voice hardened. Humanity does not want war. We have never wanted war with the Valenth or anyone else. We want to live in peace, to trade, to explore, to build. But if war comes to us, we will fight, and we will fight to win by any means necessary. She leaned back in her chair, her expression softening slightly. Go home, Admiral. Heal your wounds, mourn your dead, and then do everything in your power to make sure this never happens again, because if it does, if your people ever threaten human space again, we won't be so merciful next time. The transmission ended. Keith stood motionless, staring at the blank screen. Around him, his surviving officers waited in silence. They had heard everything. They knew what they had to do. Set course for Valanthi space, he ordered. Maximum sustainable speed. All ships maintain formation. We are going home. The fleet began to move. 34 battered ships limping through the void, carrying the survivors of the worst military defeat in Valenthi history. As they traveled, Keth Voron retreated to his quarters to prepare his report. It would not be easy to write. He would have to describe his own failures, his own miscalculations, his own inability to counter the human tactics. The High Command would not be pleased. There might be consequences, demotion, disgrace, perhaps even execution. But he owed it to the dead to tell the truth. He owed it to the living to make sure this never happened again. He sat at his desk and began to write. To the Valenthi High Command, this is the after-action report of Admiral Kethron regarding Operation Harvest, the invasion of human space through the Aaron corridor. I must inform you that the operation was a complete failure. Of 200 warships committed to this mission, only 34 survived. All objectives were abandoned. All strategic goals were unachieved. He paused, considering his next words carefully. I must also inform you that our intelligence regarding human capabilities was fundamentally wrong. The humans are not a weak, divided species waiting to be conquered. They are a highly organized, technologically sophisticated civilization with military capabilities that far exceed our estimates. They anticipated our invasion months in advance. They prepared an elaborate trap Using stealth technologies we did not know they possessed, and when we entered that trap they destroyed us with ruthless efficiency. Kieran continued writing, describing the battle in detail, the stealth frig, the guerrilla tactics, the psychological warfare, the way the humans seemed to know exactly where to strike and exactly when to withdraw. It was a difficult report to write. Every word was an admission of failure, but it was also warning. I strongly recommend that the High Command reconsider any future plans to engage human forces. Based on my observation, the humans possess capabilities that make conventional military operations against them extremely costly. They do not fight according to rules or traditions. They fight to win, using any tactics that give them an advantage. Attempting to match them in direct combat would require resources far beyond what we committed to this operation. He signed the report and sent it through the secure communications channel. It would reach the High Command before his fleet arrived home. They would have time to prepare, to decide what to do with him, to plan their response to this disaster. In the end, they did none of those things. When Cathan finally arrived in Valent space, he was not arrested or executed. Instead, he was summoned before the High Command and asked to testify. For 3 days he answered questions. He described everything he had seen. He explained his decisions and his mistakes. He offered his analysis of human military doctrine and his recommendations for how to respond. The High Command listened. They debated. They argued, and then they did something unprecedented. They negotiated. 6 months after the Battle of Erin Corridor, representatives of the Dominion met with representatives of the Terran Confederacy on a neutral space station. The negotiations were difficult. There was a lot of anger on both sides. The Valency were humiliated by their defeat. The humans were furious about the attempted invasion, but in the end, they reached an agreement. The Erin Accords established a formal border between Valanthia and human space. Neither side would cross that border. With military forces, trade would be permitted under strict regulations. Diplomatic channels would be established, and most importantly, both sides agreed that the war was over. It was not a generous treaty. The Valanthi gave up claims to several contested star systems. They agreed to pay reparations for the damage caused by their invasion. They accepted restrictions on the size of their military presence near the border, but they were alive. Their civilization was intact, and they had learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of underestimating an enemy. Admiral Keith Voran was present at the signing ceremony. He stood in the back of the room watching as the leaders of both species put their marks on the document. When it was done, Fleet Admiral Tanaka approached him. "Admiral Keth Veron," she said, her voice polite and formal, "I'm glad to see you recovered from your injuries." "I am healed," he replied carefully, "though some scars remain." "They always do." She studied him for a moment. "I want you to know that I respect what you did after the battle. You could have lied. You could have blamed others for the defeat. Instead, you told the truth and accepted responsibility. That takes courage." Kevin clicked his mandibles. It was necessary. They needed to understand what they were facing. If I had lied, they might have tried again, and more of my people would have died. That's exactly what I hoped you would understand. Tanaka glanced at the diplomats across The room, this treaty isn't perfect. There will be problems in the future. Misunderstandings, incidents, people on both sides who want to restart the conflict. Yes, when those people talk about going to war again, I want you to be there to remind them what war with humanity looks like. I want you to tell them about the stealth frig and the ambush tactics and the invisible ships that destroyed your scouts. I want them to understand that humanity doesn't fight fair and that any invasion of our space will be met with overwhelming and ruthless response. Cathon was silent for a long moment, then he nodded slowly. I understand. You want me to be a reminder, a warning. Yes, very well. I will be your warning, Admiral Tanaka. Not for you, but for my own people, so that they may live. Tanaka extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement. After a moment's hesitation, Kethan took it. His four-fingered grip was awkward around her five-fingered hand, but the meaning was clear. They were not friends. They would probably never be friends, but they understood each other. And sometimes understanding was enough. Years later, historians would look back on the Battle of Erin Corridor as a turning point in galactic history, not because of the military outcome, though that was significant, but because of what it represented. For thousands of years, the older species of the galaxy had dismissed humanity as children, too young, too chaotic, too primitive to be taken seriously. They assumed that humans would be easily conquered, easily controlled, easily absorbed into the existing power structures. The Battle of Erin Corridor proved them wrong. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not primitive. Humanity was not a species to be ignored or dismissed. Humanity was dangerous not because they had the biggest ships or the most powerful weapons. The Volante had both of those things and they still lost. Humanity was dangerous because they fought differently. They adapted. They improvised. They used every advantage they could find and invented new advantages when old ones weren't enough. Most importantly, humanity was unpredictable. You could study their tactics, analyze their strategies, prepare for their attacks, and they would still surprise you. They would do things that made no sense by conventional standards, things that violated every rule of warfare that the galaxy had developed over millennia, and they would win. After the Erin Accords, other species started paying attention to humanity. Some sent diplomats, some sent spies, some sent traders looking for profitable opportunities. All of them were trying to understand this strange young species that had humbled one of the oldest empires in the galaxy. What they found surprised them. Humanity was not a unified civilization. They had hundreds of governments, thousands of cultures, millions of different beliefs and opinions. They argued among themselves constantly. They fought each other almost as often as they fought outsiders. By any rational analysis, they should have been too divided to pose a threat to anyone, and yet when an external enemy appeared, they united. When the Volante invaded, humans from dozens of worlds and dozens of governments came together to stop them. Their differences became irrelevant in the face of a common threat. That was what made humanity truly dangerous. Not their weapons or their tactics or their ships, but their ability to unite. When it mattered, on Luna, Fleet Admiral Yuki Tanaka retired from military service 2 years after the Akoran Accord. She had served her purpose. The invasion had been stopped. The treaty had been signed, the border was secure. She spent her remaining years writing her memoirs and teaching at the Naval Academy. Her students were young officers who would lead humanities military in the generations to come. She taught them everything she knew about strategy and tactics and leadership, but most importantly, she taught them a philosophy. Humanity does not seek war. She would tell them we have enough enemies among ourselves without looking for more among the stars, but when war comes to us, when someone threatens our homes and our families and our way of life, we fight, and we fight to win. She would pause then, looking out at the faces of her students. We do not fight fair. We do not follow rules that put us at a disadvantage. We use every tool, every tactic, every advantage we can find, because the only war worth fighting is a war you win, and the only enemy worth respecting is one who has learned not to threaten you. Her students listened, they learned, and when they went on to command their own ships and their own fleets, they remembered her words. Humanity's military doctrine had a name. It was called the doctrine of preemption. It was based on a simple idea: if you know an attack is coming, strike first. Don't wait for your enemy to hit you. Hit them before they're ready. Hit them again before they can recover. Keep hitting them until they can't hit back. It was not a noble philosophy. It was not an honorable philosophy, but it was effective. And in a galaxy full of species that thought humans were weak, effectiveness was what mattered. Admiral Keth Veron lived for another 200 years after the Battle of Aaron Quartra. He never held military command again, but he became one of the most respected voices in politics. Whenever someone suggested that the Dominion should try again to conquer human space, he was there to argue against it. He told his stories. He showed his scars. He reminded his people what happened the last time they underestimated humanity. He was not a friend of humans. He did not like them or trust them, but he understood them, and that understanding, hard won through blood and fire and defeat, helped keep the peace for generations. In the end, that was humanity's greatest victory. Not the battle itself, not the ships destroyed, or the territory defended, but the lesson taught, the lesson that would echo through the galaxy for centuries to come. Humanity does not want war, but if war comes to humanity, they will already be behind you. By the time you realize what's happening, they will have already struck, and by the time you try to recover, they will have struck again. That is the human way. That is why they survive.